Next, we are going to look at how partnerships in biosecurity in far north Queensland have advanced in recent years. Mick Jeffery, who is Biosecurity Queensland Director of Far North Queensland Biosecurity, joins us now. Welcome, Mick.
G'day, Steph.
Great to have you here.
Thanks for the opportunity. Firstly, I just want to start with acknowledging the traditional owners on the country that I'm coming from today, which is South Johnston, and recognising all the traditional owners and custodians that may be joining us today for this forum, and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. Now, this is somewhat different to some of the other presentations that you've had today. I'm deeply impressed by Maxine Whitaker's 40 slides in 20 minutes. I think that's got to set a record. I've got 6, so there's going to be quite a bit of talking around just a few choice photos and some words. Don't know if I'll fill the whole 20 minutes, but I have been known to go over time. I'll try my best not to. The tech to work here. Apologies for me. I got my first slide stuck. That's a good start. Here we go. All right. Hopefully you've got that second slide. To set a context, Torres Strait. Now it's a long way from Brisbane. That's bleeding obvious. But from the top of Cape York to Papua New Guinea, our nearest neighbour, is not so far. So if you can just imagine, if you hopped in your car and drove 150 kilometres from wherever you live, where would you get to and how long would it take you to get there? Depending on what sort of decent road you may have to drive on, it's not going to take you that long, potentially an hour and a half or a little bit over. So looking at the distance between us and that neighbour, it's not very far. Now, put it even more perspective, the closest island that's within Australia's jurisdiction is 4 kilometres from PNG. So that's Saibai Island, also Boigu up there at the top of that little map. So that's incredibly close. Together with this is the Torres Strait Treaty, which allows traditional villages from a select bunch of villages in Western Province to, for cultural purposes, for trade, etc., to access most of those Torres Strait Islands. On a normal year, a non-COVID year, because at the moment the border's closed, there'd be upwards of 25,000 movements and more per annum of people coming through. Now, our federal colleagues do screen them. There's a photo there of Border Force, also quarantine. The Northern Australian Quarantine Strategy also are there to meet and greet and make sure there's no biosecurity risk coming through, but nonetheless, I wouldn't guarantee it to be 100% watertight. There are possible movements coming through undetected. So high risk part of the country. There's also incursions coming from the south. You might think, what would they be? Well, they're the mainland incursions coming into the Torres Straits. The islands in the Torres Straits is around 300, between 250, 300 islands, of which about 17 of them are inhabited, and these communities have a fair bit of movement of freight, people running between islands in their tinnies, and a lot of aircraft connections. Most of those islands have airfields as well, for those that haven't been up there. The map I've got on that slide just has a few pins in it for different islands in the Torres Straits where incursions have just occurred in the past financial year. So all the yellow ones are the exotic fruit flies that are blowing south from Papua New Guinea. They're eradicated every year. That's a national cost share program between the feds and Biosecurity Queensland, and we contract out the local rangers to do some of those activities as well. The red little pin there up near New Guinea is a recent detection of a thing called a banana skipper butterfly, which is a pest that's been in Western Province for 30 years and just appeared on Saibai Island in the past few months. As far as we know, it was only one little incursion and there's nothing further. The ones further south on that map are coming from the mainland. So we've got incursions of cane toads, onto most of those islands are cane toad free, and I'm sure we'd all love to live in a cane toad free world, and the locals want it to remain that way as well. There's also a thing called gamba grass, which is a huge environmental threat as far as fire risk throughout Northern Australia, and that just appeared on Horn Island this year. I'll detail how we're dealing with those a little bit later in this presentation. In a nutshell, we have a strategy. Now, we all love a good strategy, don't we? This fell out of the processes of the biosecurity strategy, that there was a bit of a critical link missing in the Torres Strait Northern Peninsula area, part of Queensland, and that a specific strategy needed to be put together to address those concerns. There's an initiative that was funded by Queensland Government, of which I'm part of the team, and I certainly want to shout out for my colleague up in Thursday Island, Michael Zither, who's been a critical part of making that whole initiative work over the past 2 years. We're heading towards the end of our first 3-year phase, and we're hoping it's going to continue beyond this. We cover all areas of biosecurity, so it's quite a complex and broad portfolio, so plant, animal, and invasives. Now, as part of the strategy development, I wasn't part of that, but I have been out to the communities and heard similar concerns, is that it's not all about what's coming from Papua New Guinea and heading south into production areas. That's a critical part. They all understand that. They've been living under a regime of biosecurity controls and restrictions in the Torres Strait for over 20 years. So they get it. They're very biosecurity aware. Problem is, most of the incursions they're getting, apart from the exotic fruit flies blowing through, are coming from mainland Australia. Now, this was a concern they saw wasn't being addressed. It sort of falls within local government and state government jurisdictions as far as doing things about the movement of things within the Torres Straits, particularly coming from the mainland. So a thing was developed, excuse me for the title of it, the Prevention and Control Program for Torres Strait and NPA. It's a legal term that we've used under the Biosecurity Act. It's a regulatory tool that that map there shows we're treating the Torres Straits as a particular zone to stop a whole range of invasive ants, weeds and cane toads from spreading into those areas, particularly out of the Cairns. There's a form there also detailed, biosecurity declaration form that's come into play through the largest freight company. We deal very closely with the logistics industry. Sea-Swift is the company that services the Torres Straits and most of, or large parts of Northern Australia. They've been quite cooperative, but it's been a rather large cultural change to get them on board and to move them towards tightening up some of their protocols and procedures for movement risk into the Torres Straits. The biosecurity declaration is signed by customers before they deliver high risk materials for delivery. So they could be machines, vehicles, pot plants, and the like heading north. Okay. Another thing that's been incredibly important is making the connections within the Torres Strait. So culturally, for those that haven't been there, it's a fantastic part of Queensland. English quite often is their third language. So there's different language groups within the Torres Straits, and then there's Torres Strait Creole. So that is the lingua franca between islands, and then there's English. So quite often when you're visiting islands, yeah, they'll drop into English with you when required. Otherwise, everyone's feeling much more comfortable speaking in their own cultural languages. So incredibly important to communicate in a culturally sensitive manner. An example we have here is the Black Sigatoka Banana Disease Management Project, which happened over the past few months. This was a great example of the different agencies. We had the Australian Banana Growers Council came together and provided some banana management demonstrations to local communities on 2 islands. And we also had specialist pathologists and banana variety experts from Agri-Sciences Queensland and Biosecurity Queensland joining in to do surveillance of what bananas were present, what diseases were there, and what was the extent of Black Sigatoka, which is only found on 5 outer islands in the Torres Straits and has been eradicated from the mainland. So we're looking at how do we deal with this and contain it, and possibly in the long term even eradicate it. So it was widespread community consultation. It was great to have the banana growers on board. The locals absolutely loved it. We brought along as many locals as possible, either as contract labourers or if they're willing to attend as they have that work for the dole programs, that they'd come along just to pick up skills and knowledge. So it was really, really well appreciated. But the thing is to remember, bananas have been in the Torres Straits for thousands of years, and it's part of their culture. On one of the islands that the teams worked on, the banana is the totem for one of the clans. So this is the cultural side of things. It's not sometimes all about production. They really want to have their bananas in good nick because they'd rather grow them themselves than having to buy them from their local supermarket, which is quite expensive. So it was the give and take between what can we do for them and in return, what can they do for us? I like this title, Problem Shared is a Problem Halved, and that's how it's done up there in the Straits. It's incredibly important to work with people. Sharing limited resources is key. Can't emphasize that enough. You're in remote communities, Indigenous communities work together. That's how they function. Whether any branch of government or industry that needs to go in there and work with them, that's the basis. That's the fundamentals up there. A couple of slides in front of you there. We have rangers that we've now set up to do all the fruit fly blocking operations. That's Barry Powell thumping a fruit fly block into a tree on Erob Island. We also did some really good animal biosecurity training for a lot of their environmental health workers. And the photo there is one of those workers back up in the Northern Peninsula area, taking samples from a horse that suddenly died. So there was instant application of what they'd learned, and the interest in people to learn these skills has been great. So yeah, hats off to everyone that was involved in that. Probably the last slide I've got here to talk through. This is just to show you how the whole system is working together a bit better now after the initiative has been in place for a couple of years. It's just all starting to gel a bit more. And I'm using an invasive plant example here, but this could be used across a lot of other examples of things that we've done up there and could be applied to other outbreaks in the Torres Straits in the future. Gamba grass, which you see from those photos, is quite destructive, has big fires that could threaten the communities and burn out their houses. So when this appeared on island, it was of great concern to them. How was it found? The federal government go up there with their botanists and entomologists and do surveillance there on a fairly regular basis. They didn't go up last year because of COVID, but this year they did. And one of the botanists found gamba grass on Horn Island, which is the main airport area. If you fly into Torres Strait, you come into Horn Island. So within a week, we had just an initial look and an assessment, and then we went to our partners there to see what we could do together to learn about what it is, because it was new to the Torres Straits. It was the first time it had been ever detected up there. And what could we do? So we pulled together a response with the local council, and we also contracted the local rangers, the Kaurek people, who needed to be, right on board with this weed because it's their country and they need to know what's there. They didn't know that much about gamba grass, and so it was all part of the education and training process. So we undertook surveillance, methodical weed surveillance, mapped the area, and the infestation was treated. It ended up being quite small, but I suppose it showed that it was a really good opportunity to see how everything worked together. It went from the federal government agency reporting it to us, and then we assessed what could we do. How severe was it? Didn't need a response? Yes. Spoke to our partners, got them all together, and it was addressed. And that'll now be followed up in the next couple of years with hopefully the eradication of that grass from Horn Island and from the Torres Straits, incredibly quickly. If it wasn't detected that quick and had spread to the Torres Straits, then you wouldn't have it as an opportunity to eradicate, and it would have greater consequences. So I think that was a really good news story, and there are several of those going on in the Torres Straits. So that's probably about it from me, Steph. That's just a final farewell and thanks from in Torres Strait. Essa. Thank you, Steph.
So much, Mick. And I have just, I think that was a really different take on partnerships in biosecurity to end the day. And so for those who are keen to see a little bit more about biosecurity in the Torres Strait, I've just popped a link to a new video that launched only just in the last week, I think, Mick, incorporating local language in describing biosecurity in the Torres Strait. So one to have a look at a bit later today when we're offline.